Titus Flavius Vespasianus was born into a world carved by ambition and blood. The empire stretched like a vast beast across continents, its claws sunk deep into lands rich with grain, gold, and slaves. But beneath the glitter of marble cities and the triumphal arches, Rome was a place of shadows, where every man of promise carried the weight of destiny on his shoulders. From the very beginning, Titus was marked. His father, Vespasian, had risen not from noble lineage but from grit and steel. He had marched through mud, commanded hardened legions, and carved his way to power with the relentless precision of a soldier. To be born his son meant to inherit not only opportunity but expectation. Titus was not allowed the luxury of mediocrity. As a boy, he wandered the avenues of Rome, eyes lingering on the marble faces of emperors immortalized in stone. He studied their expressions, their cold defiance, the arrogance etched forever in their eyes. He knew these were not mere statues but challenges. Could he equal them, surpass them, or would he fade into obscurity like so many forgotten sons of powerful men? His tutors filled his mind with the philosophies of Greece, the laws of Rome, the speeches of Cicero, and the strategies of Alexander. But it was not words that set his blood alight, it was the clash of arms, the vision of himself at the head of legions, banners snapping in the wind, destiny forged in iron and fire. He was handsome, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see through a man. Those who met him sensed both charm and danger. He could smile warmly, disarming friend and foe alike, but when his temper flared, there was steel behind his gaze that promised ruin. His contemporaries whispered that Titus was a man born for command. Even as a youth, when others hesitated, he spoke with the certainty of one who believed himself marked by the gods. His early years in the army shaped him. Britannia was his crucible, the mist-choked island where Rome's might clashed with tribes who fought with a savage courage that shocked even seasoned veterans. Titus learned that war was not only about formations and discipline, but about patience and the will to endure hardship. He slept in the mud, his ears filled with the howls of barbarians at night, and woke to blood and screams at dawn. He saw men die like beasts, torn apart by axes and spears, and he saw the resilience of his own soldiers, who followed orders not because they feared punishment, but because they began to believe in him. He punished deserters without hesitation, but he also shared rations with the hungry, listened to the wounded, and rewarded valor with his own hand. In him, his soldiers saw something rare, a commander who carried both iron and humanity. When the Jewish revolt erupted in Judea, Rome demanded more than ordinary generals. This was no simple uprising. It was a war fueled by faith, by the fury of a people who would rather die than bow. The empire could not allow such defiance to stand. To lose control of Jerusalem was to invite chaos across the east. And so, Vespasian was given command of the war, and at his side marched Titus, not only as a son but as an heir of blood and ambition. The campaign was brutal. City after city fell, its walls shattered by Roman engines, its streets filled with screams and fire. But Jerusalem was different. It was not just a city but a symbol, a holy fortress perched on its hills, defying the might of the world's greatest empire. When Vespasian was recalled to Rome to claim the purple, the burden of the war passed to Titus. In that moment, he ceased being merely the son of a general and became the architect of Rome's will. He approached Jerusalem with awe and with resolve. From the ridge, he saw its golden roofs glinting in the sun, its high walls standing proud, its people burning with a spirit that even Rome had not yet broken. He felt the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. To capture this city was to etch his name into eternity, but to fail would be a stain he could never erase. His legions marched with the thunder of destiny, their standards gleaming, their armor clattering like the heartbeat of Rome itself. They encircled the city, cutting off every road, every stream, every hope. The siege had begun. The first weeks were filled with fury. Roman engines hurled stones the size of oxen against the walls, each impact shaking the ground. Arrows rained down in black clouds, turning day into twilight. Inside, the defenders fought with fanatical courage. They launched sorties at night, setting fire to Roman works, striking down guards before melting back into the city's labyrinth. Each attack was met with Roman discipline, shields locking, blades flashing, the relentless machine grinding down resistance. Titus was everywhere, riding among his men, issuing orders with calm precision. He shared their hardships, appearing in mud-spattered armor, standing beneath the same scorching sun. To the legions, he was not a distant figure of authority but their general, one of them, who bore the same dust, the same hunger, the same danger. But the city endured. Weeks turned into months. Inside the walls, famine spread like a plague. Stories filtered into the Roman camps of parents eating their children, of neighbors killing each other for scraps of bread. The smell of rot carried on the wind. Still, the defenders would not yield. Titus admired their courage even as he prepared to crush it. He offered terms, promises of mercy if the city surrendered. His envoys were mocked, their words spat upon. The defenders believed God would deliver them. Titus resolved to prove that even God could not save them from Rome. The final assault was prepared with the precision of a ritual. Siege towers, monstrous wooden beasts clad in iron, were dragged into place. Battering rams loomed like the fists of giants, their iron heads poised to smash against the gates. The legions stood in endless lines, shields gleaming, spears bristling, their faces set with grim resolve. The drums of war began, a rhythm that pounded into the chest, echoing across the hills, drowning out prayer and despair alike. Titus raised his hand. Thousands of men fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. His voice carried, calm yet filled with iron. He promised them victory, eternal glory, and the immortality of Rome itself. The soldiers roared, a sound like thunder rolling across the earth. Then the war machine lurched forward. The sky turned red with fire as the siege towers advanced. Arrows hissed through the air, flames leapt from rooftops, and screams rose from the walls. Stones crashed down, smashing men and timber alike. Yet the Romans pressed on, their shields raised, their steps relentless. The battering rams struck with earth-shaking force, each impact echoing through the bones of the city. Titus rode at the center, his armor flashing in the inferno, his eyes fixed on the heart of Jerusalem. To his men, he seemed more than mortal, a figure carved from destiny itself. The defenders fought with the desperation of the doomed. They poured boiling oil on the attackers, toppled stones, and hurled themselves into the fray with suicidal courage. The walls shook, cracked, and finally, with a roar that split the night, gave way. Roman soldiers poured through the breach like a flood, their swords flashing, their shields hammering forward. The streets became rivers of blood, the cries of the dying rising into the smoke-choked sky. Through it all, Titus commanded with icy precision. He ordered, mercy for those who laid down arms, yet the fury of his men could not be restrained. Fire spread from house to house, consuming wood and flesh alike. The great temple, the heart of Jerusalem, burned in an inferno that lit the heavens. Flames devoured the sacred stones, smoke blotting out the stars. Titus watched, his face unreadable, as centuries of faith and history crumbled to ash. He had not ordered its destruction, but he did not stop it. For Rome to endure, Jerusalem had to be broken, utterly and forever. When dawn broke, the city was a corpse. Charred ruins stretched as far as the eye could see. The wails of survivors echoed like ghosts among the rubble. Tens of thousands lay dead, their bodies piled in the streets, their blood soaking into the dust. Titus rode through the devastation, the conqueror of Jerusalem, his name forever bound to its fall. To the Romans, he was a hero, the man who had crushed rebellion and secured the East. To the conquered, he was the destroyer, the shadow that turned their holy city into hell. As his men celebrated with wine and victory cries, Titus stood apart, staring at the ruins. He had achieved eternal fame, but at what cost? His heart, though hardened by war, felt the weight of the devastation. History would call him great, but greatness was built on ash, and he knew the ghosts of Jerusalem would follow him all his life. The triumphal procession awaited him in Rome, the people ready to hail him as Imperator, the savior of the empire. Yet as he left the smoldering city behind, Titus understood that his journey had only begun. The boy who dreamed of glory was gone. In his place stood a man of iron and shadow, destined not only to lead armies but to rule an empire. The fires of Jerusalem still glowed in the memories of those who had marched beneath its smoke, and in the heart of Titus, the echoes of that siege refused to fade. He carried both the glory and the burden, for in his triumph was also devastation that clung like ash to his soul. The legions hailed him as Imperator, and his father Vespasian's eyes shone with pride when word reached Rome. Yet Rome itself was a city always hungry for spectacle, a beast that fed on victories, parades, and the suffering of the conquered. And Titus knew that when he returned, he must give it the feast it demanded. The triumph was unlike any Rome had ever seen. From the far reaches of the empire, people flooded into the city to watch. The streets were draped in garlands, the temples thundered with offerings, and the senators assembled in their gleaming togas, pretending dignity even as their eyes glittered with envy. At the head of the procession rode Titus, tall in his chariot of gold, his armor polished to a mirror's sheen, his face carved in solemn triumph. Behind him marched the legions, their shields flashing, their voices chanting songs of conquest. Spoils from Jerusalem filled the air with awe and unease. Men gasped as they beheld the treasures of the great temple, golden candelabra taller than men, sacred trumpets of silver, scrolls carried with reverence yet destined for the vaults of Rome. Slaves trudged in chains, their eyes hollow, their bodies broken, symbols of defiance turned into trophies. And at the rear, beneath a cruel display of Rome's power, walked the captive leaders of the revolt, bound and humiliated, their faces twisted with rage and despair. The people roared, their voices like a storm. Flowers rained from the balconies, trumpets blared, and drums shook the city's stones. Yet even in this hour of victory, Titus felt an emptiness gnawing inside him. He saw the faces of children who had starved in Jerusalem, the flames that devoured temples, the desperate courage of those who fought until the last. But Rome did not care for ghosts. Rome cared for triumphs, for the spectacle of power, for emperors who fed its hunger for domination. Titus played his part, lifting his hand, smiling when required, bowing his head before Jupiter's temple as the crowd screamed his name. The arch of triumph that would bear his memory was already planned, carved in stone before his story had even ended. His father Vespasian, now emperor, watched with satisfaction. For years he had clawed his way upward, fighting obscurity, betrayal, and civil war. Now he saw in Titus not only his son but his successor, a man whose fame would secure the Flavian dynasty for generations. But Rome was never without whispers. Some said Titus was too ambitious, that he loved power more than loyalty, that he might one day turn against his father. Others feared his closeness to the people, for he could charm them with ease, moving through crowds with a warmth that emperors rarely dared to show. In the Senate, men sharpened their tongues, waiting for the day when father and son would clash. Yet Titus never betrayed Vespasian. Their bond was strong, forged in war and tempered by shared ambition. As commander of the Praetorian Guard, Titus became the sword and shield of his father's rule. It was a position of immense power, for the guard could raise or topple emperors with the tilt of their spears. He held their loyalty with a grip of iron, ensuring that no blade would strike his father from behind. But with power came suspicion, and enemies whispered that Titus was ruthless, that he had lovers among the nobility, that he indulged in excess, that he was dangerous. The shadow of Nero still haunted Rome, and some saw in Titus another tyrant waiting to reveal himself. He ignored the whispers, though he heard them. He focused on securing the empire, on strengthening its armies, on silencing rebellions before they could ignite. His days were filled with counsels and decrees, his nights with restless thoughts of the future. At times, he sought solace in pleasures, in music and wine, in fleeting romances that scandalized the Senate but endeared him to the common people. Yet beneath it all, there remained the soldier, the man forged in war, whose eyes had seen too much to ever be blind to the fragility of power. When Vespasian fell ill, the empire trembled. The old general, once so unbreakable, now lay weakened, his body failing even as his mind remained sharp. Titus stayed at his side, watching his father fade. There was no rebellion between them, no Caesar and Brutus, no father slain by his son's ambition. Instead, there was sorrow, the inevitable passing of an age. On his deathbed, Vespasian is said to have joked, reminding those around him that emperors were expected to become gods, and that he must be rising to heaven. With that, the old warrior was gone, leaving Titus alone with the crown of Rome heavy in his grasp. The transition could have been bloody. Rome was a city that had seen brothers slaughter each other for power, that had seen generals turn on emperors, that had drowned itself in civil wars. But Titus ascended without bloodshed. The Praetorian Guard, the Senate, and the people accepted him. They knew his victories, his face was already etched in triumph, his name already carried by legions as a symbol of strength. And yet, many feared him. They remembered Nero, remembered Caligula, remembered emperors who had begun with promises and ended in madness. Titus was young, powerful, adored by the army, and now armed with the throne itself. What kind of ruler would he be? The early days of his reign were filled with unease. Rumors swirled that he would turn cruel, that he would exact vengeance on his enemies, that he would plunge the empire into excess and tyranny. But Titus surprised them. Where Nero had indulged in cruelty, Titus showed restraint. Where Caligula had bathed in blood, Titus sought mercy. He listened to petitions, eased burdens, and walked among the people not as a god but as a man. He was generous with his wealth, giving banquets, funding spectacles, repairing what was broken. He wanted Rome to see him not as a tyrant but as a protector. Still, the empire tested him. In the first year of his reign, disaster struck in a way no emperor could have prepared for. Far to the south, beneath the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, the earth rumbled with fury. The mountain, silent for centuries, erupted in an explosion that turned the skies black and rained fire upon the towns of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Thousands died in moments, buried in ash, suffocated by smoke, their homes swallowed by molten rock. The news reached Rome like a nightmare, and all eyes turned to Titus. Would he ignore the catastrophe, hide behind walls of marble, or face it? He chose to face it. Titus poured resources into relief, sending ships and soldiers, opening the treasury to aid survivors. He wept for the dead, walked among the ruins, and spoke with the broken who had lost everything. For the first time, Rome saw an emperor not as a distant figure of majesty but as a man who shared their grief. His compassion shocked those who had expected cruelty. Instead of a tyrant, they found a ruler who understood suffering, who carried not only the laurel of victory but the burden of humanity. But the gods, or fate, were not finished testing him. Soon after the eruption, a fire swept through Rome itself, consuming neighborhoods, devouring temples, reducing homes to rubble. Panic spread, and whispers returned. Had Titus angered the gods? Was he cursed? Was his reign doomed? He did not flinch. Again he opened the treasury. Again he walked among the people, giving aid, speaking words of comfort, showing a heart unafraid to be wounded. When plague followed the fire, bringing death in silent waves, Titus remained present, refusing to flee to safety, refusing to hide. His presence gave hope, his generosity earned love. The people began to call him not only emperor but father. Yet beneath the love of the people, danger lingered. The Senate still distrusted him, jealous of his power and wary of his popularity. His younger brother Domitian watched from the shadows, ambitious, impatient, already imagining himself on the throne. Titus knew the fragility of trust, the sharpness of daggers hidden beneath togas. He ruled with kindness, but he never let his guard fall completely. He remembered Jerusalem, remembered how fragile walls could be, how quickly faith could turn to ash. And so, Titus walked a tightrope between power and compassion, between destiny and doom. He was emperor now, his every breath a step into history, his every decision echoing across the vast empire. The boy who had once dreamed of statues now felt the weight of marble pressing upon him, for he knew that his reign would not be judged by victories alone but by how he faced the storms that threatened to drown him. As the second year of his reign dawned, Rome looked to Titus with both fear and admiration. He had survived fire, plague, and the wrath of a mountain. He had shown himself generous, merciful, and strong. Yet the question lingered in the hearts of all who watched him: could such a man survive in a city that devoured even its greatest sons? The empire waited, the shadows deepened, and the fate of Titus hung like a sword above him, sharp and inevitable. The years of Titus's reign unfolded like a storm-tossed voyage, each moment balanced between triumph and tragedy. Rome had expected a tyrant but instead found a man whose heart seemed larger than the crown upon his brow. Yet power in Rome was never a gift freely held, it was a poisoned chalice, and every drop was heavy with suspicion, envy, and betrayal. The people adored him, they spoke of the emperor who walked among them, who wept at their suffering, who opened his treasury as if it were a fountain for the poor. He had rebuilt homes burned in the Great Fire, sent aid to the survivors of Pompeii, and faced plague with the courage of a soldier who refused to abandon the battlefield. In him, they saw not only a ruler but a father, a man who carried the empire's grief as his own. Crowds cheered his name not because they feared him, but because they loved him. For Rome, this was rare, almost unnatural. But in the Senate, the mood was different. Senators who had survived the madness of Caligula and Nero looked at Titus with wary eyes. They did not trust emperors who were popular, for the love of the people was more dangerous than legions. It gave a man power greater than law, and so they whispered behind columns and in shaded gardens. They watched Titus closely, measuring every gesture, every decree, wondering when he would reveal the cruelty they were certain lay hidden. Closer still was Domitian, the younger brother who walked always in Titus's shadow. Domitian's heart burned with ambition. Where Titus was patient, Domitian was restless. Where Titus was generous, Domitian was calculating. He watched his brother rule with grace and felt bitterness twist inside him. For every cheer Titus received, Domitian heard silence for himself. For every honor Titus bore, Domitian saw only his own absence. The throne, he believed, should one day be his, but patience was a virtue he never mastered. To wait was to suffer. To watch Titus loved by the people was to endure torture. And so he lingered at the edges, smiling when required, bowing when demanded, but inside, his envy grew sharper with each passing day. Titus, perhaps, saw this. He was no fool. He had marched through blood and fire, had seen men betray each other for less than a loaf of bread. He knew the look of ambition, the glimmer of hunger in the eye of one who could not be satisfied. Yet Titus was not a man to strike blindly. He allowed Domitian his place, gave him honor, gave him presents, hoping that blood would bind them stronger than envy. But Rome was a city where brothers rarely trusted brothers, and the memory of past betrayals haunted every corner of the Palatine. The empire itself did not rest. Beyond the marble and spectacle, storms brewed at the borders. Germanic tribes stirred in the north, Parthian whispers grew in the east, and in the provinces, governors strained against the leash of Rome's authority. Each day brought messages of unrest, of battles brewing, of shadows gathering where legions marched. Titus met them as best he could, his mind always moving between compassion for his people and the steel required to hold an empire together. Yet even as he balanced these burdens, he carried within him the scars of Jerusalem. The memory of the city's fall haunted him in silence. He did not speak of it often, but those close to him noticed the moments when his eyes grew distant, when he stared too long at the flames of a torch, when he walked the colonnades in the silence of night. The ghosts of that siege walked beside him always, whispering of blood and ruin, reminding him that every victory left behind a shadow. Perhaps it was this weight that made him more merciful, more determined to ease suffering where he could. Perhaps he sought in Rome's joy a way to quiet the cries of Jerusalem. It was in this spirit that he completed the Colosseum, the grand amphitheater begun by his father. It rose like a mountain of stone in the heart of Rome, its arches soaring, its corridors vast, a monument to the glory of the Flavians. On the day of its opening, the city roared with anticipation. Titus spared no expense. For 100 days the games continued, a festival of blood and spectacle unmatched in history. Gladiators clashed in deadly duels, wild beasts from Africa roared and died, mock naval battles flooded the arena with water, and prisoners were executed in scenes of cruel theater. The people cheered, intoxicated by the grandeur. Some whispered that such extravagance was wasteful, but Titus knew Rome. He knew that the mob demanded bread and spectacle, that an emperor who gave them both could rule their hearts. The Colosseum stood not only as stone but as proof that Titus understood the soul of his city. Still, fate was merciless. Just as the Colosseum became Rome's wonder, the empire suffered again. The Tiber River swelled with floods, sweeping away homes, drowning families, turning the streets into rivers of despair. Disease followed, carried by the stagnant waters, and once more the city groaned under the weight of death. Titus did as he always had. He opened the treasury, gave what aid he could, and walked among the suffering. Yet there was a heaviness upon him, as if the gods themselves had set their eyes against his reign. Each disaster seemed a trial, each calamity a reminder that no man, no matter how powerful, could escape the will of fate. In the second year of his rule, the first signs of illness came upon him. At first, it was dismissed, a fever perhaps, the weakness of a day. But it returned, sharper, more consuming. Whispers spread quickly in Rome. Some said it was poison, the work of those jealous of his throne. Others looked at Domitian with suspicion, though nothing could be proven. Titus bore his illness in silence, refusing to show weakness, but his face grew pale, his steps slower, his eyes shadowed. He continued to appear before the people, continued to show kindness, continued to rule with the same humanity that had defined his short reign. But those close to him saw the truth. The emperor was fading. He traveled to the countryside, seeking relief, perhaps hoping the fresh air would heal him, perhaps knowing that death waited no matter where he fled. In those final days, he spoke often of his regrets. To his attendants he confessed that he had made only one mistake, though he did not name it. Some believed he spoke of his brother, that he regretted not curbing Domitian's ambition more forcefully. Others believed it was the destruction of Jerusalem, that the memory of the burning temple still burned within him. Whatever it was, the words lingered like a riddle upon the empire. When death came, it was sudden, like the closing of a curtain. He was only 41 years old, still young, still filled with promise. The empire had barely begun to know him, and now he was gone. Rome wept. The people mourned as if a father had been taken from them. They lined the streets, their cries rising into the sky, not of fear but of genuine sorrow. Few emperors had been loved as Titus was loved. Few had ruled with such compassion. His body was carried with honor, his name already spoken with reverence. The Senate, which had once doubted him, now praised him. They declared him a god, lifting him into the pantheon of the divine. Domitian took the throne, the younger brother stepping from shadow into light. His reign would be different, darker, a contrast that only heightened the memory of Titus. For in comparison, Titus shone brighter, his brief rule a golden flame that burned too quickly but left a glow that could not be extinguished. The Arch of Titus still stands in Rome, carved with the images of Jerusalem's spoils, a monument to victory. Yet beyond the stone, beyond the carvings of soldiers carrying sacred treasures, the memory of Titus lives in whispers of compassion, in stories of an emperor who did not hide from disaster, who walked among his people, who ruled with a heart as open as his hand. He was a conqueror, yes, but also a man who, in the short span of his rule, showed that power could be tempered by mercy, that an emperor could be loved as well as feared. His story is one of fire and shadow, of triumph and tragedy, of a man who rose from the legacy of war to carry the burden of empire, only to be taken before his time. Titus remains a figure of paradox, the destroyer of Jerusalem and the beloved of Rome, a man whose name echoes not only in stone but in the fragile hearts of those who once called him their emperor.